My name is Maya. I showed up unannounced after years of working, years of sending money, never missing a call when they needed something. But when I came home, no one was there. No lights, no voices, just silence. And my father, abandoned in a hospital, on life support, while my mother and siblings were sipping cocktails in Bali. So I did the only thing I had left. I froze the bank account. Within an hour, chaos hit. But that was just the beginning. What kind of family does that to someone they say they love? The cab slowed as we turned into the neighborhood, a pocket of old Sacramento that hadn't changed in years. My childhood street still had that quiet stillness about it. Sidewalks with hairline cracks, porches with rocking chairs that barely moved, and front yards full of stories no one told anymore. As we passed the corner house where Mrs. Green used to water her garden in a bathrobe, something in my chest tightened. That garden was gone now. Just gravel and a plastic flamingo. I looked down at the small gift bag on my lap, the edges already worn from the flight. Inside was a cash envelope and a bottle of my dad's favorite cologne. I'd wrapped it myself, late one night after a double shift in Seattle, imagining his face when I surprised him. "Here okay?" the driver asked, pulling up to the house. "Yeah, here's good," I murmured, reaching for my wallet. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the years, or maybe just the absence of warmth. There were no lights, no wreath on the door, no smell of cinnamon or slow-cooked pork from the kitchen, just silence and still air. I stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, and stood staring at the front steps that once held late-night chats with Dad, or long goodbyes when I left for college. The porch light didn't flicker on. I rang the bell. Waited. Knocked. No answer. I checked my phone. 2 bars. Tried calling Mom. Straight to voicemail. I called Cassian. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. My fingers hovered over the keypad. Maybe they were asleep, out for groceries, a walk. But something about the stillness wasn't right. The kind of still that doesn't just mean absence, it means abandonment. I stepped back to the sidewalk, trying to breathe. Across the street, a woman pushing a stroller waved. Her face lit up as crossed toward me. "Hey, Maya?" Her voice tilted up with polite curiosity. "Wow, long time. Thought you moved to New York or something?" "Seattle," I corrected gently, trying to recall her name. She smiled. Right. Your mom said you hadn't been back in years." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "They're not home, though," she added, adjusting her scarf. "Left a few days ago." "Your mom said they were headed to Bali. Figured you'd gone with them." I blinked. "Bali? Yeah, big family Christmas trip. Said they needed a break." She tilted her head. "Wait, you didn't know?" My stomach dropped, but I managed a tight smile. "I guess not." The woman looked uneasy now, realizing something wasn't adding up. Also, I hope it's nothing serious, but, your dad? He's been in the hospital, right? The ambulance came like 2 weeks ago. Thought you knew." She trailed off, her voice caught between concern and confusion. I swallowed hard. "Hospital? Which one?" She frowned, thinking. "County General, I think. He collapsed in the yard. Paramedics said it was his heart. I assumed someone told you." "Yeah, thanks," I murmured. She gave me a half-apologetic smile, adjusted her stroller, and walked on. I stood there for a few moments longer, the winter breeze sneaking down the collar of my coat, but the chill had already settled somewhere deeper. Without another word, I turned, walked back to the cab, and opened the door. "Back to the airport?" the driver asked, eyes on the mirror. "No, take me to County General." He nodded. The cab pulled away from the curb. I looked back once, just once, at the house with its drawn curtains and dark windows, at the porch, where no one stood, at the door that didn't open. They'd gone to Bali, packed their bags, boarded a plane, left the country, and left him. Alone, sick, unseen. I thought of the transfers I'd made over the years. Thousands of dollars. Rent, utilities, tuition, emergencies that were always just a phone call away. But no one called me when my father collapsed. No one told me he was fighting to breathe. I had become a paycheck, a distant ATM with a name. In the silence of the cab, I felt something collapse. Not dramatically, but permanently. The driver turned onto the main road, the streetlights casting long shadows across my lap. "They left him," I whispered. To no one. Maybe to myself. And this time, I wouldn't be the quiet one. I stayed silent the entire ride to the hospital. The cab's heater hummed low, but I couldn't feel a bit of warmth. My hands were folded in my lap, gripping the same gift bag I had carried from Seattle, now useless, ridiculous in my lap like a joke I wasn't in on. Outside, Sacramento moved like any city preparing for the holidays. Lit storefronts, hurried steps, and a sky already darkening by early evening. I watched it all pass like someone looking out of someone else's life. When we pulled up to County General, I thanked the driver without looking at him, stepped out, and made my way inside. The fluorescent lights hit me first, sharp, sterile, unforgiving. The air smelled of ammonia and recycled anxiety. People sat slouched in chairs, some holding tissues, others holding silence. It was the kind of place where time didn't move, it just existed. I approached the front desk, fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. A nurse with a short bob and a tired smile looked up. "Hi, I'm looking for my father, George Ramos. I was told he was brought in 2 weeks ago." She typed quickly, eyes scanning the she frowned. "He's in ICU, 6th floor." She paused. "Are you family? I'm his daughter." Her lips pressed together. "No one's been by? Not even once. I'm glad you're here." She handed me a visitor pass, gave me the directions, and buzzed me through. Elevators always seem slower in hospitals. I watched the numbers light up one by one, gripping the pass in my hand like it might anchor me. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a corridor chilled by too much air conditioning and too little human warmth. Room 623. The hallway felt longer than it should have, each step heavy, like I was walking towards something I wasn't ready to see. When I pushed the door open, I didn't recognize him at first. The man in the bed had sunken cheeks, pale skin, tubes in his arms, a ventilator feeding breath into him rhythmically. His mouth hung slightly open, a pale band gently tethering one wrist to the side rail. Machines beeped in steady intervals, as if they were the only proof he was still here. I didn't move right away. I just stood there. That was my father. He'd always had this steady presence about him, quiet but sure, the kind of man who didn't say much but made you feel safe just by being nearby. And now, he looked like a ghost someone had forgotten to carry away. I took slow steps toward him, pulled the chair beside the bed, and sat down. My knees nearly gave out as I did. "Dad?" I whispered. "Nothing. Just the sound of air pushed in and out of his lungs by a machine that didn't care if he knew I was there or not." I reached out, hesitated, then placed my hand gently over his. His skin felt dry, cool, fragile. "It's me," I said, my voice barely audible. "I'm here." Still nothing. Tears came, not in a rush, but like a slow, stubborn leak. I didn't sob. I didn't shake. I just let them fall, one by one, silent as the man in front of me. I sat there like that for maybe half an hour, maybe longer. Time was irrelevant. Then the nurse from the front desk stepped in quietly. "I didn't want to disturb you," she said gently. But I thought you should know." I looked up. When he was brought in, he was unconscious. We didn't have an emergency contact listed, just a number. We called it a few times, but no one came. I swallowed hard. "Do you remember the number?" She nodded. "It was listed under spouse. We assumed it was his wife, Vera." Of course. My mother had known, and she had done nothing. "How long has he been like this?" I asked. 2 weeks yesterday. A neighbor called 911, said he collapsed outside trying to bring in groceries." "Groceries?" "My father collapsed trying to carry groceries." "Has he said anything?" "No, not since he arrived. He had a mild stroke. That, combined with his age and untreated hypertension. He's stable, but his condition is delicate. If you hadn't come." Her voice trailed off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I nodded and thanked her. She gave me a sympathetic glance before stepping out, leaving the door slightly ajar. I turned back to my father, still holding his hand. So they knew. For 2 weeks, my mother, my brother, they knew. They were home. Alive. Well, booking plane tickets. Enjoying cocktails with umbrellas in them. Posting sun-drenched photos of beachside breakfasts. And they left him here. Alone. On a machine. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope of cash I'd brought. The gifts wrapped in red tissue paper. I set them on the windowsill, suddenly unsure what else to do. He didn't need gifts, he needed people. He needed someone to sit here every day and tell him he wasn't forgotten. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts. Not a single person had noticed I was in town. Not one family member had tried to check on me. They were probably still in Bali, sipping from hollow coconuts and talking about how much they'd do for this family. My throat tightened. Not from sadness, but clarity. They'd made their choice, and now, I was making mine. The evening bled into night. Nurses changed shifts. Lights dimmed. The quiet hum of machines kept their rhythm. I didn't move. I stayed by his side, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Not because I thought he'd wake up that night, but because I knew he shouldn't be alone another minute. Somewhere around midnight, I leaned in, brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, and whispered, "You're not going to be alone again, Dad. I promise." By the time the sun rose, I hadn't slept. My back ached from the stiff hospital chair, and my eyes burned from staying open too long, but I didn't care. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I'd promised him that. And if there was one thing I still had control over, it was keeping a promise. The nurse came in just after 6, quietly checking the monitors, scribbling something on a chart. She gave me a soft smile, the kind that says more than words. "I'll be back with his meds," she whispered. When she stepped out, I made my way to the small bathroom just down the hall. I splashed cold water on my face, letting it drip down my neck. My reflection in the mirror startled me. My eyes were swollen, my skin sallow. I looked like someone else. Or maybe I finally looked like the version of me that had always existed beneath the surface, behind the wired transfers and polite phone calls. Back in the room, the machines kept up their rhythm. My father hadn't moved, not even a twitch. His chest rose and fell like a ticking clock, counting down something no one had dared name. I took out my laptop, set it on the tray table, and stared at the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I opened the video call app and hit call under Mom's name. It rang twice before it connected. The background came into view before her face did. Blue sky, palm trees, a glimmering pool. Then there she was, in full color, sunglasses perched on her forehead, shoulders sun-kissed, a drink in one hand. Music played faintly in the background. It was mid-morning here, but wherever she was, it looked like sunset. "Oh, Maya," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Is everything okay?" I stared at her. For a second, I couldn't speak. "Did you know?" I asked quietly. She tilted her head, confused. "Know what?" "That Dad's in the hospital, on life support." She blinked. "He didn't want to come with us. You know how he is, always making things more dramatic than they are. He collapsed outside, alone. A neighbor had to call 911. She shrugged. "We all needed a break, Maya. You have no idea the stress I've been under. Keeping everything together, handling your brother, making sure bills are paid. I've been the one paying the bills." The line went quiet. "Mom, he could die. And you're by a pool." "I didn't think it was that serious," she said, sipping her drink. "Your father always had a flair for the tragic." I ended the call before I said something I wouldn't take back. The rage didn't come all at once. It simmered, slow and steady, like water reaching boil. I sat still for several minutes, trying to calm my breathing, but the ache in my chest grew heavier with each beat. I picked up my phone and texted Cassian. "Dad's in ICU. He's been here for 2 weeks. He's not breathing on his own." No reply. I waited 5 minutes. Then I called. He picked up on the 4th ring. "Maya, what's going on? Did you know Dad was in the hospital?" There was a pause. "Yeah, Mom told me. She said he didn't want to come. He's on life support, okay? And, I repeated, incredulous. "He could die, Cassian. You're blowing this out of proportion. We're on a getaway. Chill." I didn't even realize I'd stood up until I felt the blood rush to my face. My hands were shaking, my voice on the edge of something I couldn't pull back. "You're always so emotional," he said, his tone like a slap. "Can you just handle it?" I hung up. I walked. I needed air. The walls of the ICU felt like they were caving in. I made my way down the corridor, past reception and out to the small cafe on the hospital's south lawn. It was chilly, but I didn't care. I ordered a black coffee and sat at the far end of the patio, where no one would bother me. I pulled out my phone and opened the shared family bank account. The balance made my throat tighten. Tens of thousands gone. Airline tickets, resort fees, shopping sprees. All in the last 3 weeks. They were living their best lives, on my dime. I had covered everything for years. Dad's prescriptions, utilities, Cassian's car loan, even the down payment on Mom's kitchen remodel. Every time they asked, I gave without hesitation. Because that's what family does. Because I thought love was measured in sacrifice. But this wasn't sacrifice. This was betrayal. They knew Dad was sick. They left anyway. They used the money I sent for his medications to sip cocktails under foreign skies. My fingers trembled as I hovered over the screen. One small button. Freeze account. No one would be able to withdraw another cent. I tapped it. The confirmation came instantly. The account was locked. I exhaled. Slow, controlled. Then, without thinking, I whispered under my breath. "Let's see how paradise feels without my paycheck." I didn't expect it to happen so fast. 48 minutes, to be exact. That's how long it took after I froze the account. 48 minutes of silence. And then, the phone started buzzing. 4 missed calls from Mom. 6 from Cassian. 2 from an international number I didn't recognize, probably the resort manager or maybe some concierge used to kissing entitled guests' feet. The voicemails were urgent, manic even. "Maya, something's wrong. My card isn't working. I need you to call the bank. Why are you doing this? We're stranded here. Cassian had to put the hotel on hold with his credit card. Call me back. I didn't call back. I didn't listen to the rest. I just watched the screen light up like a warning beacon, a flashing signal of their unraveling. It was the first time in years that I held something over them, and I wasn't planning to give it up. I walked to the hospital lounge with slow, steady steps. The automatic doors hissed open, letting in a faint breeze from the outside courtyard. Inside, the air was cool and dry, too quiet for the chaos my phone was registering. I found a seat by the window, dropped my bag beside me, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the shared bank account and clicked through the transaction history. The list was endless. Plane tickets to Bali, 3 of them. Spa packages booked under Cassian's name. 5-star dinners. Luxury shopping. An odd charge from a jewelry store in San Francisco. Another from an electronics boutique I'd never heard of. All from the family fund, the fund I replenished month after month because someone always had a reason. Dad needed prescriptions. Diana's tuition was late. The electric bill was high. Can you send a bit extra this month, sweetie? Mom would ask. Just until things smooth out. Things had never smoothed out. I was the smoothing agent. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched tight. That wasn't family money, it was mine. My overtime hours, my skipped vacations, my dinners of ramen and peanut butter sandwiches when I was building savings so they wouldn't have to struggle. And while I sat in fluorescent lighting next to a machine that breathed for my father, they were sipping drinks with umbrellas. I shut the laptop and exhaled. No sound came out. Just pressure, slowly released. Back in the ICU, I walked slower than before. My body had adjusted to the weight of knowing. Knowing they had lied. Knowing they had chosen beaches and buffets over hospital visits. I reached my father's bedside, pulled the chair close again, and sat. His eyes were still closed. The same machine's word, breathed, beeped. I rested my hand on his wrist, just lightly. I froze it, I whispered. They're freaking out. He didn't move, but I imagined his mouth twitching in approval. Just the smallest hint of a smirk behind the breathing tube. The kind he used to give when a joke had gone too far, and only he thought it was funny. I reached for the leather bag I had noticed yesterday under the side table. It was worn, cracked along the edges, with a brass zipper that stuck halfway. Something about it had called to me. I pulled it into my lap and opened it slowly. Inside were papers, medical records, receipts, old notes in my dad's tidy, looping handwriting, a stack of yellowing envelopes bound by a rubber band, and a journal. The leather cover was soft from use. I opened it somewhere near the back and flipped through pages of writing. Daily thoughts, some legible, others scribbled and scratched out. His pen had pressed hard against the paper, the words etched with a kind of quiet frustration. Near the final pages, I found it, a single entry. Short, clear. If Maya comes, don't tell her. Let her see with her own eyes. The rest of the page had been torn, carefully, intentionally. I sat there, the journal in my lap, my father's hand still in mine, and stared at that one sentence. He knew. He knew they'd hide the truth from me. He knew I'd come anyway. That sentence didn't feel like a note. It felt like a dare. A challenge to see past the version of the family I'd been sold, and into the one that had grown roots behind my back. A nurse passed by the doorway and peeked in, saw me sitting with the journal, and nodded politely. I closed the book and set it gently back in the bag. Dad, I whispered, my throat tightening. You knew they'd hide this from me, but you also knew I'd come. I sat there long after the journal was zipped back into the bag. The daylight had faded, and the artificial glow from the hallway lights cast a yellow sheen across the polished hospital floor. From where I sat, I could hear the faint sound of a child crying somewhere down the corridor, and the beeping of another machine, perhaps in another room where someone else was hoping not to be alone tonight. The buzz of my phone pulled me back into the present. It lit up again. Cassian, then Mom, then a number I didn't recognize. The screen looked like a panic board at an airport gate. Each call, a new gate closing. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I walked out of the ICU wing and headed toward the family waiting area, a room with brown couches and stale coffee, where bad news often waited politely behind curtain calls. I sat down in the corner, plugged my phone into the wall socket, and opened my banking app. The freeze had gone through. Every linked card was now inactive. The account read, status locked. Owner access only. I called the bank to confirm. The rep verified everything after a few security questions. Would you like to re-enable access for other cardholders? She asked. No? Just me? Understood. Only you can reactivate it now. I hung up and set the phone on my lap, screen facing up. It vibrated again before I could even put it down. Voicemail from Mom. I played it, partly out of curiosity, partly out of knowing exactly what it would sound like. Maya, what are you doing? "You ungrateful little brat, I gave you life, and this is how you repay me? Your father would be ashamed. I raised you better than this, fix it, now." I played it again, and again. Each time, the tone hit harder than the words. There wasn't grief in her voice, no concern, no remorse. Just indignation, like I had dared to disrupt the image she had worked so hard to paint of our perfect functional family, one where she reigned as the suffering matriarch, Cassian as the loyal firstborn, and I, the wallet that wouldn't shut up. I felt heat climb up my spine, my hands were cold, but inside me, something boiled. That voicemail wasn't a cry for help. It was a weapon, and this time, I wasn't going to let it land. I gathered my things and walked slowly, deliberately, back to Dad's room. The nurses were doing their evening rounds, lowering lights, checking charts. The world was quieter now, the building humming with exhaustion. Inside the room, he was still. Breathing machine still doing its job. That steady artificial rhythm now felt like a metronome in a rehearsal for grief. I stood beside him and took his hand again. It was dry, rough in the same way it had always been after a day working outside. "Dad," I said softly, "they've turned this into a performance, a vacation bought with lies. But I'm not playing along anymore." I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. The startup tone echoed too loud in the quiet room. I winced, but no one stirred. I opened my email and found the contact for his attorney, Mr. Raymond, an older man I remembered meeting once at a family gathering. He had a face that always looked like it had heard too much truth and learned to keep it anyway. The subject line was simple. Urgent. George Ramos. In the message, I wrote exactly what had happened. I detailed Dad's condition, his current state, the financial situation, the absence of his legal next of kin, and I asked for two things. Confirmation of any documents Dad might have signed and guidance on how to protect what was left of his dignity. Before sending it, I reread the final lines. They used him. And now, they want to use me. I won't let them. Not anymore. I hit send and sat back in the chair. The machine next to me beeped in its rhythm. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't look. Instead, I whispered, half to Dad, half to the walls, half to whatever part of me had finally stood up tall after all these years. "You want to fight me with guilt, Mother? Then be ready for what guilt can't stop." The next morning, I rose before the sun. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of shallow moments of rest, sitting upright beside my father's hospital bed. The nurses' station outside had dimmed its lights overnight, and now it buzzed quietly back to life with the rustling of clipboards and coffee cups. My phone, sitting on silent mode beside me, lit up with a notification. One new email. The sender. Raymond Law Offices. I clicked it open immediately, my heart hammering hard against my ribs. "Maya, your father left a directive with our office 2 months ago. He specifically instructed us not to act until we were contacted from your number. If you're available today, we'd like to set up a secure video call to go over the contents." I replied without hesitation. Yes, I was available. I'd clear the day. 2 hours later, I sat in a hospital conference room. The window blinds were drawn halfway, allowing in strips of winter light that cut across the wall like slanted knives. I had the laptop propped open in front of me, the bag with Dad's journal beside it, and a black coffee cooling by my elbow. When Mr. Raymond's face appeared on the screen, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and relief. He looked older than I remembered, with deep-set eyes and the kind of calm that only comes from seeing too many families fall apart over things they never thought they'd fight about. "Maya," he began, offering a brief nod. "First, I want to say, I'm sorry you're going through this, and I'm sorry your father isn't able to speak for himself right now. But he did speak, in a way, and he made sure his wishes were on paper." He clicked on something off-screen. A PDF opened on my laptop. I scrolled slowly. It was a notarized amendment to his will, dated just over 8 weeks ago. Maya is to be granted full authority over all medical and financial decisions, should I become incapacitated. Vera and Cassian are to be removed from all powers of attorney, executorship, and estate management. I make this decision with clarity, and not under duress. It felt like someone had placed a warm, steadying hand on my back. Not because of the authority, but because he'd seen it coming. He had known. He had planned, and he'd chosen me. A lump caught in my throat. Not grief this time. Not even anger. Just the strange kind of recognition that lands in your chest when someone finally tells you they see you. Not who you pretend to be for them, but who you've always really been. I didn't know he'd done this," I said. Raymond nodded. "He didn't want anyone to. He was afraid they'd try to contest it, or manipulate you before you saw it for yourself." I wiped at my cheek, suddenly aware I was crying. We spent the next 30 minutes going through the next steps: an emergency order to freeze all estate-related financial activity, a petition for temporary conservatorship, And, most daunting of all, a court hearing. Raymond told me I could attend virtually, but I declined. "I'll be there in person," I said. "They need to look me in the eye." That afternoon, I walked back into my father's. The nurses had just finished checking his vitals. One of them gave me a thumbs up before exiting quietly. I sat beside him again, opened the group chat with my mother and brother, and typed one sentence. "We're settling this properly, in court. No greetings, no explanations, no apologies, just truth." I didn't wait for a reply. I closed the app, powered off the phone, and leaned back in the chair. He looked so peaceful. The machines hummed steadily. His chest rose and fell like the tide. And this time, for the first time, I didn't feel helpless watching him. I felt like I was finally steering the ship. Later that evening, I hired a private nurse to assist with overnight care. A soft-spoken woman named Lisa, in her mid-40s, who treated my father's condition with the kind of quiet dignity I hadn't seen since this whole ordeal began. I gave her full instructions, walked her through the monitors, and showed her where the journal was kept. "He keeps this close," I said, handing it to her. "If he wakes up, even for a second, make sure it's in reach." She nodded. Before leaving the room, I returned the journal to the bedside table, laid my hand gently on my father's arm and whispered, "This time, they'll hear you through me." I had never seen the inside of a courtroom before. At least not like this, not with my name on the docket, not with my blood relatives seated across from me like we were strangers on opposite sides of a war. 2 days after the attorney filed the emergency petition, I found myself standing in front of Sacramento Family Court, dressed in the plainest black slacks I owned and a simple blazer I hadn't worn since a friend's funeral 3 years ago. It felt like armor now, not decorative, necessary. I walked through the heavy double doors alone. Vera and Cassian were already seated inside, side by side at the plaintiff's table. Vera looked like she'd aged 10 years since our last call. Her makeup was flawless, but her hands fidgeted in her lap. Cassian was chewing the inside of his cheek, a habit he picked up in college when he got nervous during tests. They weren't used to being on the defensive. Their lawyer, a man in an expensive gray suit and a haircut too crisp to trust, gave me a once-over and then looked away. I took my seat across from them and didn't glance in their direction again. The bailiff called the session to order. Judge Eleanor Klein presided, mid-60s, sharp eyes, and the posture of someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. Good. I needed someone like her today. As the hearing opened, Mr. Raymond began by laying out the facts. My father's condition, the timeline of his hospitalization, the lack of family visitation. Then came the financials, detailed records of withdrawals, unauthorized charges, and the breakdown of who had access to the shared account. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, eyes focused only on the judge. Then came Cassian's turn. He stood, buttoned his jacket like he was at a boardroom pitch, and launched into the performance of his life. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "my sister has always been intense. She's had emotional struggles in the past. We've supported her when she lashed out." Mr. Raymond stood immediately. "Objection? Irrelevant, inflammatory, and unsupported." The judge held up a hand. "Mr. Ramos," she said, looking directly at Cassian. "You'll speak only to the facts and do so respectfully." He sat down, jaw twitching. Raymond handed the judge a printed copy of the email Cassian had sent to our extended family just the day before. In it, Cassian accused me of manipulating Dad's condition to seize control of the family estate and called me unstable and emotionally dangerous. Judge Klein read the email silently. Her eyes narrowed. Then she set it aside without a word. "Mrs. Ramos," she said, turning to Vera, "do you have anything to say?" Vera stood up, her voice already laced with practiced indignation. "I raised that girl. I carried her for 9 months, paid for her braces, her ballet classes." "Mrs. Ramos," the judge interrupted, "we are not here to discuss ballet. You've been named in financial records linked to tens of thousands of dollars withdrawn from an account intended for your husband's care." Vera opened her mouth, closed it. Outside the courthouse, the world didn't wait. By the time we recessed for lunch, a local reporter had caught wind of the hearing. I spotted her near the stairs, snapping photos of Cassian arguing with Vera on the front steps. He gestured wildly. She turned away, clutching her handbag like it might bite her. Later that night, someone sent me the link. A photo of them, mid-argument, both visibly flustered. The headline read, "Family Feud, Siblings Accused of Robbing Father's Estate While Vacationing." An anonymous Reddit post followed. "Rich kids left their dad to die while they flew first class to Bali. Daughter pulls the plug." On their cards. It went viral before dinner. Back inside the courtroom, the mood had changed. The judge reviewed the final documents, my father's notarized amendment, financial records, and confirmation of his current condition. She looked at me. "Ms. Ramos," she said, Based on the evidence provided and the absence of any legal or medical opposition, I'm granting you full conservatorship over your father's medical and financial affairs." I didn't blink. "Vera and Cassian Ramos," she continued, "you are barred from access to any assets or decisions pertaining to Mr. George Ramos without this court's prior approval. Do you understand?" Cassian stared at the floor. Vera crossed her arms and looked straight ahead. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded and stood, collecting my things. Outside, the cold air bit at my face. The courthouse parking lot was half empty. I reached my car, opened the door, and paused as my phone buzzed again. "Incoming call, Vera?" I let it ring. The phone rang until it stopped. I stood beside my car in the courthouse parking lot, keys in hand, watching the screen go black. I didn't need to hear whatever Vera had to say. There was nothing left for her to explain, justify, or twist into guilt. That part of our dynamic, the version where I owed them softness after betrayal, had been severed, clean as glass. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in front of a rented hall tucked behind the local veterans' garden. It wasn't grand or overly formal. There were no velvet ropes or gilded podiums, just a simple space surrounded by old oak trees and winter-dormant grass, with a view of the same Sacramento skyline my father had looked toward each time he took his evening walk. The room inside was quiet, peaceful. A single wooden table at the front displayed a photo of my father in his army dress blues, taken before I was born. Next to it was the framed mission statement of the new foundation I'd formed, the George Ramos Dignity Fund, a non-profit in his name, built using what remained of the frozen estate, aimed at supporting elderly patients abandoned in hospitals, those whose families had vanished or simply never cared. I didn't need a large board or public applause. I needed something to exist in his name that none of them could erase. I had filed the papers myself, worked with a lawyer to make it legitimate. We posted the announcement online 3 days earlier. The response was overwhelming. People shared their stories. Nurses reached out to volunteer. Donations came in from strangers who didn't know my father but knew the loneliness of being forgotten. At the small memorial ceremony, only 7 chairs were filled. 2 nurses who had cared for him in ICU, Mr. Raymond, the neighbor who called 911 that night, and one of my father's army buddies from 30 years back. He'd found the post online and drove 3 hours to be there. Not a single member of my family was invited. Still, they came. I saw them from inside, just before I stood up to speak. Vera in a beige suit, too thin for the wind. Cassian in a navy coat, hair slicked back like he was walking into a board meeting. They tried to enter, casually at first, as if this were just another public event where their names on a guest list were assumed, expected, but security stopped them. "I'm sorry, you're not on the list," the man said with firm politeness. "We're his family." Vera snapped. "This is our right." "No ma'am, it's private, guests only." Cassian tried to argue, but the door was already closing. I didn't look their way when I took the mic. Didn't need to. The people who mattered were already seated. "He never asked for much," I began, steady and clear. He was the kind of man who found peace in simple routines. Black coffee at sunrise, afternoon walks, Sunday crossword puzzles. And presence. That's what he valued. Not gifts. Not extravagance. Just presence. And dignity. I paused. The weight of that word, dignity, settled in the room like warm light. Today isn't about tragedy. It's about reclaiming something that should never have been taken. The right to be seen, heard, remembered. When I stepped down, no one clapped. No one needed to. I walked to the back of the room, where his old jacket hung on a coat rack near the exit. It was the same one he wore on cold mornings. The fabric faded at the elbows. One pocket stitched in a slightly different thread. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A note I had written 2 nights before, after reading the final pages of his journal one more time. I tucked it into the inner pocket of the jacket and patted the seam closed. "You were right. I needed to see it myself. But now, I see everything." After the ceremony ended, I lingered, watched the others disperse. Accepted a few quiet thank yous, a couple of respectful nods. Eventually, I stepped outside into the fading afternoon. The wind had picked up. I walked slowly to my car, unlocking it with a click, then stood for a moment, letting the quiet settle. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. "Cassian." I didn't open the message immediately. I sat in the car first, turned the engine, but didn't pull out. Then I opened it. "We've lost everything. Are you happy now?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, typed, paused, deleted, and then I wrote back. "You were never mine to lose." The apartment was quieter now. Even the sounds that once kept me company, traffic down on Pine Street, the clicking of my neighbor's heels in the hallway, felt further away. It wasn't silence that filled the space. It was distance, a kind of peaceful detachment that didn't beg to be broken. By the front door, hung my father's jacket. I brought it back from Sacramento after the ceremony. I didn't launder it, didn't fold it or store it. I just hung it exactly as it was, still carrying the faint scent of his aftershave and the cold air from that final morning under the oak tree. Every time I left for groceries or came back from a walk, I passed it, never touched it but never ignored it. It wasn't a monument, it was a presence. Life had taken on a different rhythm. I worked remotely now, consulting in the mornings, managing the foundation in the afternoons. The George Ramos Dignity Fund had already served 8 patients in its first month, providing them with warm clothing, reading glasses, even arranging end-of-life support for one veteran whose family hadn't returned a single call. It gave me purpose, but not escape. Grief, I'd learned, doesn't get quieter. You just build a life around it with thicker walls. That Tuesday morning, after updating our grant spreadsheets and answering a donor's call, I took a break to sort through a week's worth of mail, mostly junk, a utility bill, a newsletter from a local shelter, and then one envelope with no return address, written in handwriting I recognized instantly. It was Vera's. I opened it slowly, not out of curiosity, but caution. Inside was a single piece of paper. No greeting, no sign-off, just 5 words in her unmistakably elegant cursive. I was wrong. I lost you. There was no apology. Not really, no attempt at contact information, no follow-up plea, just that. And somehow, it hit harder than any of her shouting voicemails or legal jabs. I sat with it for a while. Then I stood, walked over to the journal still sitting on my bookshelf, the same one I had read beside Dad's hospital bed, and slid the note inside the back cover. No ceremony, no closure. It didn't belong in a trash bin, but it didn't belong on my wall, either. Later that week, I visited the garden again. The tree had shed most of its leaves. Its bark was darker now, damp with winter rain. Beneath it, the plaque with Dad's name was still clean, the lettering firm. Someone had placed a laminated card beside the plaque. I bent to read it. You were loved, even when forgotten. There was no signature, no one around, just that message, stuck in the ground with care. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat for a while on the wooden bench nearby, breathing in the damp air and the scent of nearby rosemary bushes. When I got back home, I boiled water for tea and made my way to the kitchen. As I reached for the cabinet, I noticed something new stuck to the fridge. A yellow sticky note. The handwriting mine. But the words had come unprompted, written during a quiet moment the night before. Love loudly. Protect quietly. Walk away when it's time. I ran my finger along the edge of the paper, then left it where it was. It didn't need to be profound. It just needed to be true. And in that quiet kitchen, next to the jacket that would always be his, I felt something shift. Not a dramatic healing, not a grand release. Just a deep one I didn't need to hold anymore. Sometimes, family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shows up when it matters. Maya's story reminds us that love without respect is just manipulation in disguise. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? What would you have done in her place? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life tales that cut deep and speak truth. Your voice matters here.